I hear this from a lot of people when you have like a trauma in adulthood, sometimes the old childhood trauma, the way that it messes you up and the nervous system, glitching, it all of a sudden it just gets out of the bottle like a genie and you can't get it back in. And it just feels like you're having a breakdown. But what it is just a bunch of normal trauma symptoms. And if there's nobody there to like guide you through it or, help you with it, it can feel like you're unfixable.
All right, Anna, thank you for joining me.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad we worked out this solution.
So I actually discovered you through my subscribers because when my channel, when my videos started to get a lot of views, I noticed like almost every single day, because back in the, I got so excited when I first started to get a lot of views. I would read every single comment. I don't have time to do that anymore. But I remember for like 2 weeks straight, every single day I would have at least one comment that would say like, you and the Crappy Childhood Fairy are my two favorite YouTubers
Oh,
like day after day. And I was like, okay, I got to check this person. I mean, the name was kind of eye-catching too. I'm like, I got to check this person out. So I literally watched like 5 minutes of one video and I thought, okay, I get it. The way that you talk about your experiences is really powerful. And you seem like you're very careful with the wording that you use, which I really appreciate.
hmm.
Then I picked up your book, Re-regulated, which I see is behind you, and thought it was fantastic. So I'm not trying to steal your introduction. I know you can introduce yourself, but yeah,
Oh,
really glad to have you on. And I
thank
think
you.
most of my subscribers probably already pretty aware of you since they're the ones that turned me on to you. But would you mind just giving a little background for those of them
Yeah.
who have not seen your work before?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And by the way, I knew about you because my subscribers talk about you. So I'm really glad we get to meet. So I'm a YouTuber as well. And I wasn't always the crappy childhood fairy. I'm somebody who, for about 31 years, has known how to treat my own tr symptoms that I now know come from complex PTSD. 31 years ago, there was no name for it. I think they thought I was a little crazy. I didn't respond to the things that I was doing all the right things. I was going to therapy, but I had a really rough childhood, and maybe we'll get into that. And I was doing okay as a young adult, but then I got attacked on the street and my mom died and I got my heart broken like basically in the same little couple of weeks. And it was too much. It was just too much for me. And I think I had actual PTSD. It was a severe attack. I got my jaw and teeth broken. People just came out of nowhere. There wasn't any reason for it. It was just this like random attack and and so I was malfunctioning. I couldn't sleep right. I couldn't eat right. I was crying all the time. I was starting to have very destructive thoughts for myself. And now I know, like, that's so normal for not only PTSD, but a head injury. Very
Mhm.
normal. But they didn't know. And they were like, well, you should go talk to a therapist about it. When you're a victim of a crime, you get free therapy in California. And so I had this pot of money. I was just like your average young person who didn't have money for therapy much, but I had this infinite pot. So I bumped up from one time a week to three times a week. And we sat there and we talked about this assault. And my mom was an alcoholic. So her death was complicated grief. There's just, oh, and then the heartbreak. And so we would just talk about these sad things. And I would come out of those appointments feeling terrible, like worse than when I walked in every time. And I was starting to sort of guard myself, thinking, I don't want her to know how bad I'm feeling because I'm afraid she's going to like want me to be hospitalized or something, that I would be a danger to myself. Like it was that bad. And she meant well and she was well educated and she was a good person and I'm sure a good therapist. But what nobody knew back then is with complex PTSD, having to talk about the trauma is sometimes the worst thing to do.
Absolutely.
There might be a time and a place, there might be a context, and there might be a way to do that or a technique you can use, but nobody knew. And then I went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, here, take a bunch of like benzos and stuff. And needless to say, that didn't help. So I got off that quickly. But I bumped into this woman. I confided in her how badly I was feeling, and I felt like I couldn't go on. I barely knew her, but I was giving her a ride somewhere. And she was covered with tattoos. And she was much younger than me, but she was rough. She had once lived on the street. So I thought, I don't know, she felt like a safe person to tell. And she said, do you want to come in and show me? Um, I mean, do you want to come in and I'll show you what helped me? And I basically had nothing to lose. I normally wouldn't have said yes, but I said yes. And I went into her. She lived in this funky warehouse. And she showed me a technique where I could write my dark thoughts using a very specific technique, not venting, but very structured in order for the intent of releasing. And anybody who wants to learn it, I'll provide a link in the show notes here.
Great.
But she showed me this thing, and like I wrote all night. I went home, I wrote, I called her in the morning, and from that moment forward, I never had that level of dark thought again. Like it just like fixed that. I had life problems. So this is the background of who I am. What qualified me is that I came out of a really severe episode of PTSD. And I think probably I hear this from a lot of people when you have like a trauma in adulthood, sometimes the old childhood trauma, the way that it messes you up and the nervous system, glitching, it all of a sudden it just gets out of the bottle like a genie and you can't get it back in. And it just feels like you're having a breakdown. But what it is just a bunch of normal trauma symptoms. And if there's nobody there to like guide you through it or, help you with it, it can feel like you're unfixable. So that's how I had felt. And then all of a sudden I was feeling better. And so I started teaching people these techniques. And over the years, I learned a lot more about um, the all the just solving life's problems. I had a lot of problems, like everybody who's had trauma does. And so we can talk about that. But I started teaching it. I went to a 12-step program for families of alcoholics. And showed people there. I got a lot of benefit from it myself. And this woman continued to function basically as my 12-step sponsor, even though she was in AA and I was not. But she would take my calls, she'd help me, she'd listen to what I had written, she'd give me some advice if I asked for it. And I just, my life blossomed, my skin changed, like it went from this like gray dead looking color and dull eyes, and I just looked pretty and bright, and I was full of energy, and I got interested in new things. I became a runner, all this good things. I quit smoking, which was incredible. I was a very heavy smoker, and some problems were slower for me to solve, relationships being the main one. But I changed so much that hundreds of people would ask me what I did, what happened. And so I was teaching this technique one-on-one, one-on-one, one-on-one. And finally, I made a video or I made a blog post in 2016. I was like, I just can't handle all these inquiries. I'll write it down. I'll stick it on a website. So I called the website Crappy Childhood Fairy. And then they kept asking me, could you explain what you wrote? So I made a video to show them, here's how to do it. And I stuck that on YouTube. I did a few more blog posts. I mean, I almost never posted. I was just trying to help myself not be so busy. I was a single mom. And and then one day I looked over on YouTube and there were a couple thousand subscribers, whereas my blog was like a few people I knew on Facebook or something.
Yeah.
And, and I thought, oh, of course. And I was a video producer as it happens. So I kind of like it all came together and became this. And so now it's courses, it's coaching programs. I have a team of coaches and a team for customer service and a team for all the tech back end. And we have a membership program. I do webinars, I do live workshops, and I have a book out called Re-regulated, and you can see it right there. Have another book coming out in October called Connectability. So it just took over my life. It's my whole purpose. So that was a little longer than you were asking for, but
No,
that's
that's
me.
okay.
That's
There's just there's
I,
about nine different things I'd like to follow up on
all
there.
right, let's
There's a
go.
lot. For starters, I'm sure you know this already. I'd love to tell you that your experience with therapy was super unusual and that that's not normally how it goes for people who have experienced trauma, but unfortunately that is not the case. And as a therapist, I am because of what I specialize in, I'm very rarely someone's first therapist, like almost never. I am usually the guy people come to when like no other therapy has worked. So I hear all these stories of, because I ask people, I'm like, okay, so you've been in therapy for 10 years or however long, things haven't gone the way you wanted them to, tell me a little bit more about your past experiences so that I don't just repeat, the same mistakes that other therapists have made. And probably one of the most common things I hear is that therapists are pushing people to really talk in depth about their trauma
Hmm.
way too quickly
Hmm.
in the therapeutic relationship, sometimes in the intake, literally in the intake.
Hmm.
And on one hand, it's incredibly frustrating to me. On the other, I don't want to come down too hard on therapists because I am very fortunate to know what I do about trauma. It came from a supervisor in continuing education. Honestly, I have 3 degrees in mental health. I have a bachelor's, a master's, and doctorate. And when I graduated, I knew nothing about trauma. Like, no, I knew literally the DSM criteria, which any human being can read on the internet. I didn't really know how to diagnose it. I definitely didn't know how to treat it. And it's just not something. Now, granted, I graduated a little over 10 years ago, so maybe this has changed recently. I don't think it has though.
Yeah.
I think trauma and autism, not that we're going to talk about that today. I think those are the two things that we really know the least about professionally.
Yeah.
And the quote common sense approach when you know someone has been through some really difficult experiences in life is you got to get them talking about it.
Hmm.
And when it's something like non-traumatic grief or just, general life stress building up, like that does work for some things. But that very rarely goes well for trauma. And there's a lot of different ways that you could explain that, I know. But the one that's always resonated the most with me is it's almost like a budget. So you sort of have this budget for emotional distress, right? Like each
Yeah.
day you can sort of handle some certain amount of distress and be kind of okay. I know it's a really vague term. But if that budget is exceeded, you're going to either reach a point of like dissociation, panic attacks, whatever it is your system is prone to doing when overwhelmed. And unpacking something that your brain has worked very hard to pack away for your own protection and so that you can function on a day-to-day basis in a 1 hour therapy session with no real plan or structure and not a strong relationship with the person doing it is like 9 times out of 10 a recipe for disaster. Um, I own my own practice now, so thankfully I can customize the intake paperwork. But prior to that, I worked for a hospital for 7 years, and I remember literally in our intake paperwork packet, one of the questions was, and it was this hilariously inappropriately sized section where it was like 3 lines, like 3 lines long.
Everything that ever happened
Yeah,
to you.
yeah. Have you had any traumatic experiences? And I had people that are like, I need 10 pages. Like, I can't fit it all in. I can't even put the bullet points in there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think we really rush people through this process and get very locked into this linear line of thinking that if you just talk about it, it will get better. And I 100% agree with you. I think the actual process, although it can vary from one person to the next, it is not that simple when we're talking about trauma. And it sounds like you just kind of stumbled across that with this chance meeting with a friend,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Thank goodness. Yeah. And we now know, I've had a chance to do the research. Like I had the experience of having it help so much. It's writing followed by meditation twice a day.
Sure.
And again, I always will say, because sometimes people hear me just mention this and they think I mean journaling, and I don't. It's different. Journaling has a specific purpose that's really helpful for many people. This is different. This is taking out the trash of your mind. Um, and it's in effect, it's a petition, it's a prayer. It's like, take this off my mind,
Yeah.
take this from my mind. And then what I want is to be able to see like, what's the most important thing right now? What am I to do today? That's what I think gets really like smashed in your mind when it's dysregulation. I want to bring up dysregulation right now. For me, that was a magic word. That was the word. I learned the word from reading Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, when it first came out, and also Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And it was the first time I just had a strong, I didn't resonate with everything, especially in the van der Kolk book. Not all of it applies to me, but complex PTSD, I had never heard of that. It's a thing, that's a thing. And I saw what the signs are. And I knew instantly, it's like, that is me. That's exactly what I have. I'd never heard anybody get it like that. I was always sort of feeling like I didn't, whatever they thought was wrong with me, it didn't really fit. So I thought not only was something wrong with me, but I'm just such a weirdo and unhelpable and, unfathomable. And I'm so normal. Like, and there's the great thing about YouTube is when I started making videos about how I experienced the symptoms, I just got like, hundreds and then thousands of people back talking back and saying, that's what I have too. I know this is the first time I've ever heard somebody describe what it's like. So it's been this amazingly liberating experience to just go public with what it's like. and to talk about what I've done to overcome it. And I'll qualify that right now and say I find it to be something like diabetes, where
Yeah.
it's never really gone. It's well treated sometimes. So when I use my tools and I use them every day, and I recognize when I'm sort of like, whoops, I'm slipping back into my symptoms, I know how to course correct. When I don't do that, I'm just as messed up as I ever was, and sometimes more. It reminds me of, I have people in my life who are alcoholics and many of them sober, and they talk about this concept from AA that alcoholism is a progressive and fatal disease. And their experience was that their alcoholism was, this bad when they got sober. And then when they slip, it's this bad. Like it was
Mhm.
progressing the whole time. I was like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel like my trauma symptoms are. They can really come strong if I fall off the beam. And so I just live with the knowledge, just like a diabetic has to really watch what they eat. They might even be able to stop taking insulin, who knows, but they have to monitor their glucose. Just the same, I have to keep an eye on how am I regulated today? Can I even detect? The funny thing, like when you're dysregulated, when your nervous system is dysregulated, like one sign of it is you're not very good at telling how you're doing. You sort of lose touch with yourself. So I have to have objective signs going, that's happening. And that's what I want to say what healing is like. It's not like this island of perfect people and one day you're not drowning anymore and you're just there in Hawaii. It's not like that. You
Right.
know. It's like you can be a little bit in Hawaii every day and then you're like, whoops, I'm drowning. Wait, I'm back. Wait. And you just know what to do about it. And that's what I found when people talk about they want to feel safe. The greatest safety that I have is that if whatever happens, I'll know what to do. I'll know what to do. I have some tools to help myself, and I'm as like a lot of people who, were neglected as kids, I'm very resourceful. I can figure things out. You can drop me in the desert and I will survive, like a lizard. So,
Yeah,
so
the very first guest I ever had on here was a guy named Chris. He goes by Valiant Fate on Instagram, and he's someone who really struggled a lot with depression and alcoholism, and
yeah.
radically transformed his life after an unsuccessful suicide attempt. And the way he phrased recovery, I think to this day, is like one of my favorite depictors. He said, for a long time, my demons had me in chains. And now the roles have reversed and I have them in chains, but like they still
But
exist.
they're still there.
They're
Yeah.
not dead. They're not
Yeah.
defeated. I have them subdued, but they try to break free every day. And I have to make sure that, there's certain
Yeah.
things I have to do. And those things might be a little different for everybody, depending on the nature
Yeah.
of what you're struggling with. But there's sort of this order of operations that you really got to stick with. And sometimes people get a little lax on those and they think,
Yeah.
"Oh, maybe I'm cured. Maybe it's over with." And I'm not trying to sound like a pessimist, but I think whatever got you to, the healthiest, highest functioning point of your life is probably just something you should continue.
Continue doing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I see too many people just get a little overconfident. It's happened to me too, honestly. I'm like, I could stay up late a few nights in a row and not be careful with my nutrition. Those are two of my really critical
Yeah.
self-care strategies. And
Yeah.
it's not long before things just don't feel right. There was one other thing you mentioned that I want to come back to as well, because I noticed this in a lot of your videos. You, you're somebody who found a lot of like validation and maybe even freedom in having a label, having a diagnosis, right? And that's uh, maybe mixed
Yes and
feelings
no.
about that. I
Yeah.
remember you saying something, and because it really stuck with me the way you said it, because I'm like, this is almost exactly what I say to people who come in, because I'm a psychologist, so I also do testing.
Hmm.
And a lot of people come in very ambivalent about psych testing. They're like, on one hand, I know something's going on, and I want someone to tell me what this is and what I do about it because I need guidance and I feel very alone, as you
Yeah.
mentioned. But then there's like this flip side of like, but I don't want a label. I don't like labels following me around and things like
Yeah.
that. And I
Yeah.
totally get that. But what I
Yeah.
usually say is something along the lines of like, if there is a label for something you are struggling with, it's actually really good news. Because what that means is you're not the only person on earth who's ever felt this way. It means there's probably millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of people dealing with their own version, at least, of the same thing. That also means you got a bunch of people like me out there who are studying this thing. And we've
Hmm.
done a lot of research trying to figure out how to treat that effectively, which obviously is ongoing and imperfect, but we're working on it. Which means if we can find a label that you feel like fits for what you're experiencing and what you're struggling with, we
Hmm.
can use that label to help you find a path forward. And until you get that, it very much just feels like you're just trying a bunch of random stuff and floundering and feeling like you're just crazy and broken and the only person on earth who's struggling with these things. That's kind of how I frame it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the upside of a label. And for me, it was really helpful to, and I wasn't diagnosed at that time. I read about it and I recognized myself instantly. And I can just say I was in couples counseling with my husband once and I explained, I said, I think I have CPTSD. And he said, I think you do too. So okay, so that's my diagnosis. But his knowledge, that counselor's knowledge of CPTSD was not totally accurate. He thought it was the same thing as, PTSD or borderline or all this stuff
Oh.
that's maybe not so helpful and maybe is stigmatizing and maybe does send you down the wrong path. And so I really encourage people to both listen, consult the experts and read and learn and become sovereign over your own healing choices. And there's cases where that would not apply, like when somebody's not able to make decisions on their own behalf. I acknowledge that. I've known people and made decisions for them, but not professionally, but just like, people in my family and close friends. I've seen people in that state. So with that accepted, here's an example. So as YouTubers, we have followers all over the world, right? So you learn a lot about how different people, what's their environment like. And so in the UK, I've noticed this experience that people have where they know that they have this, they feel desperate for help, they sign up, but their healthcare system can't assign them a professional for a couple of years.
Mm.
So I'm there like, hey, that doesn't have to be no healing right now. You can get busy now, with all these practical things to start caring for yourself and learning. But that idea that you can't heal, that the professionals, they grant you healing and you're just stuck out in the cold in outer space without it, like that's not a good way to think about it. And so sometimes I think the world of, it really depends on the professional. I mean, I know some incredibly gifted therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists, and I've encountered some who are less so, less tuned in, more tuned into their own views of these things. And then on YouTube, you sometimes get people and they're like, well, I'm a doctor and you're just full of it. And you know, you get that too. So it's like the jury is out on exactly what is true. And so I really feel like it's important for us to keep pursuing like what works. And if something works, keep doing it. And if something makes you feel like you want to die, maybe do something else.
Mhm.
And that's how it was when I kind of made that decision to take it into my own hands that I was better to be able to access help from professionals and better able to, just go faster. I mean, I actually think like going fast in healing ought to be like, we have to just like put it on the wall. No, it is a goal. It is a goal. We don't want to be stuck like this forever.
Absolutely.
We want to get right to it.
That's a lot of my frustration with my field, honestly. And it really depends a lot on, there's all these various different therapeutic disciplines and things like that. But I'm on a lot of therapist discussion boards, and I
Yeah.
see a lot of people frustrated, and I do get it to a degree, but like
Yeah.
frustrated with managed care and insurance companies because they say, or even frustrated with clients sometimes because they're like, people are really impatient. This is their words, not mine. And like they think they're going to get better in like 4 or 6 sessions. And it's like, on one hand, that's probably not a realistic
Yeah.
expectation. On the other, if you're the
Yeah.
one suffering, of course you want it to happen as quickly as possible. And
Yeah.
of course, if a therapist is, this has been my experience on because I've been in therapy too, and this is kind of how
Yeah.
I've experienced it is like when a therapist doesn't really seem to have a clear plan of action and they just kind of seem to be like meandering through your experiences with no clear agenda,
Hmm.
really frustrating. It doesn't feel like healthcare. It doesn't feel like there's an actual plan involved.
Yeah.
And if you don't see at least a clear path to addressing the symptoms you're experiencing, like, yeah, you're gonna get impatient. And I actually think that's pretty reasonable. Some of that probably comes from my own bias too, because I am, as a therapist, I'm a very behavioral focused person. And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not the
Good.
kind of person who thinks, hey, if we just talk about it and you change nothing about what you're doing, things are going to get better. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to do stuff. That's basically like my motto. You have to do things. But
You have to do things.
I actually
Yeah.
thought about calling a group that once, but it got vetoed by my boss at the time.
I think a lot of things traumatizing us are stuff that we're doing today. And it was fairly easy. I saw 11 different therapists over 17 years. And it's not that I wanted help with today's problems, but it was also very tempting to sort of follow along with them into this thing where all we talk about is how terrible my mother is and how much everything was her fault. And I was definitely affected in a bad way by a lot of stuff she did, but that's not the whole story. I was contemporaneously then, doing stuff that was really sabotaging my relationships, my health, my life, my career, and I wasn't getting help with that. And my mom was dead by the time this was all happening. She wasn't even alive. There was nothing we could do about what had happened in any way. And so I loved it when this friend showed me something I could just do with the anxious and angry thoughts and feelings that were throttling me. I would just describe what it's like to have this type of wounds from neglect and abuse in childhood, no matter what you call it, CPTSD, you can call it what you want, but I've met now thousands of people who have these matching symptoms that I do, where it's sort of something stressful or hurtful happens. Somebody criticizes you, you get honked at, you wake up in a weird, like emotional flashback, bad mood or something, and nothing is right. And you're inside your own feelings and head. So it's very hard. You can't really find anything to hold on to go, oh, this is probably a neurological phenomenon. What happened was some dopamine thing. You're
Yeah.
not, you don't know, what it feels like is that this is it. Well, finally the truth is upon me. Everything sucks and I can't fix it and I should just give up. And that's what it feels like. So good tools are what help you start anchoring into like what's really going on. You need it every day, not just once a week when you're getting professional help, but every day. And I think it's really important to have a community of people who are also healing, who you can just text anytime and say, "Ugh, I woke up in the worst mood." And they can say, well, I remember just yesterday, you said that it felt really good to just go outside and move around first thing, that it helped you kind of not fall down that rabbit hole. So we do that. And I do think the community aspect of, I think trauma, like complex trauma, it's a relational wound. And it happened, primary relationships were broken and messed up and you were hurt through those relationships. And then it just goes and makes things wonky in every other relationship, almost without exception. And so it seems to me that in addition to sort of healing the sort of I really focused first on the dysregulation, neurological. It's not just emotional. It affects your hormones. It affects your hand coordination, your ability to focus your mind. Like it's a lot. There's a lot of things that get better when you learn how to re-regulate. So that's why I had to write a whole book about that, about how I do it. And I did it with writing and I do it with suggestions for people to do things that really work for them. For a lot of people, exercise. Like nobody ever told me this, but if you exercise, get your heart rate up, like it really helps. It's probably helps more than anything I've ever found.
Absolutely.
And I'm not like a big exerciser,
Sure.
but I'll do anything to feel better. And that's my philosophy. We must feel better. We just like whatever modality we're using or modalities, we have to have a way to feel better. It's too harsh. It's just too bad a neighborhood going on here. And you can't solve problems when you're just overwhelmed with all these angry and anxious thoughts. So in my technique, I learned to just name them. Just name them. You don't have to solve them. You don't have to just, organize them or get to the bottom of them. Nothing. You just name them. And on any given sitting, when I sit down to write, my angry and anxious thoughts, I call them fears and resentments, but they're going to be a mix of like grave things like, I think I might have cancer, to and I don't, but I mean, like anybody, I get fear about that sometimes. And I have had serious health problems where I had fear about it as well. Fear this isn't going to get better, fear I'm going to die. So we have fear whether we have the cancer or not. And then resentment. And my resentment can really snowball into, everybody, all the neighbors, every postal carrier ever. It's like this joke in my membership community. It's like, can we pick on the postal service today? We have all, I moved and now we have these like really nice postal workers. And I'm like, oh, it was locational. It was where I used to live. They were just so mean. They wouldn't say hello back. And I was like, so there it's them. And then of course the IRS. And for people outside the US, that's the agency that collects our taxes. And it's like, oh, they're just awful. And you try to call them and they're against you. And then cable providers, mobile phone providers, I would just go through like 3 days of hell over a bad customer service interaction. And so basically, I was enslaved by my nervous system's response to feeling slighted, left out, treated as a second-class citizen. I couldn't handle it. I could have talked about that for years, but what fixed it was learning how to go, oh, my nervous system is like doing the thing. And I would do nervous system fixes. And then I would just come up to a more reasonable, like, wow, I really am sick of this internet provider. Maybe I'll change. No, it's too much trouble. I'll just deal with it. I mean, that's in my best interest is just to take sane action on my life problems. And that's what I couldn't do before. Everything was out of proportion. And I would, in addition to being lashing out or feeling completely overwhelmed by things, I would really like skip the due diligence about letting people into my life. That was another thing that I think is trauma related that got a lot easier when I knew how to regulate. Because when you're re-regulated, the red flags, but even if you don't see them, there's just like something in there that's like, I don't know. I feel something is off. So finally, you have access to those really like fine level feelings and not just the gross feelings, the big ones. You have access to those and you're like, no, something feels off. I'm going to ask questions. And that's kind of like, so I've been healing now, like very productively for 31 years. And I'm getting a lot better. Like I'm going to have a direct conversation about something I'm confused about. So we have some house guests right now and they're great. But I had my birthday and nobody remembered that somebody had to cook dinner and we had all these people coming over. And for once, I hadn't like managed and controlled the whole thing. I was just like, oh, I thought everybody had it and they didn't, and everybody had arrived. And and so our house guests pulled it together. The man is this great chef. They pulled it together. They spent all this money and they did it. They were supposed to make the big group dinner tonight. And I was all nervous about it. I was like, I don't want them to have to pay twice for a big group of people that I've invited over. But I do want this guy to cook because that was what I invited everybody over. We have a Michelin star chef here. He's going to cook for us. I did want him to cook. So I just like walked up to him and I said, here's my predicament. I don't want you to have to pay twice. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I do want you to cook. And we just like, all we did was talk about it. That kind of thing was like way over my head
Mhm.
in the past.
Mhm.
I would just get so worried about what everybody thinks. And,
Yeah.
at the same time, people see me as being very aggressive or very, like in your face, but I wouldn't speak up until after I was already frustrated
Yeah.
and convinced nobody cared. So all of this, there's this life stuff that used to be really hard. It causes a lot of problems. It pushes people away. And so just learning to re-regulate helped me.
Mhm.
And so as crappy childhood fairy, I teach that, but I'm like an advice columnist for what do you do? What's the etiquette guide for people who didn't quite get raised by parents who taught you this stuff? So I just teach the etiquette of stuff. Go talk to them or, ask the person, is this a date? Or, things
Yeah.
like that can be hard to
Yeah.
confront and hide behind. So
Well, yeah. Well, I'm really glad we're kind of making our way back to relationships, especially now
yeah,
that's really the main focus of your second book. Because I think I already know the answer because you kind of just said it at the end there, but I'm curious if you've seen the same pattern that I've seen with regards to trauma and relationships, which is, if you think of the continuum of communication styles where you've got, passive on one end, which is very, people pleasing and other focused and putting yourself last. And then aggressive on the other end, which is aggressive is poorly named, by the way. It's a little pet. It doesn't mean the person's like
yeah,
yelling and
yeah,
swearing at you. It's more
yeah,
like aggressive means like kind of they're aggressively focused on just pursuing their own wants and needs. It doesn't mean they're just a jerk. And then assertive in the middle, which means, I'm treating my wants and needs as being relatively equally important to those of others. What I see is that traumatic experiences seem to push people towards the polarized ends of that spectrum,
yeah,
not necessarily more so one than the other, but that they make our communication styles extreme. And my theory,
Yeah.
I'd love to study this someday, but it'd be a very complicated study.
Yeah.
Theory is that they're really two sides of the same coin, and that both of those extreme relational and communication styles are actually strategies of seeking safety. And so the passive communicator,
Hmm.
I think, seeks safety by just making sure everyone around them is okay and happy
Hmm.
and comfortable all the time,
And not
thinking,
mad at me. Yeah.
right, exactly. If everyone around me is good, I have nothing to worry about, and then my nervous system can
Yeah.
relax. Whereas the aggressive communicator, I think, probably has learned through experience, if I don't make sure other people
Yes.
know what I want and need, it will not happen. People don't
Yeah.
understand me, people don't ask me, people don't check in with me, maybe even people don't care about me that much. And I have to just put what I need out there again and again and again to even have a minuscule shot of being heard and understood and validated. I
Yes.
think they're two seemingly opposite approaches to solving
Yeah.
the same problem, which is
Yeah.
I get hurt a lot in relationships. Does that kind of match what you've seen?
It does. Yeah. I think you make a good point. I hadn't really seen it as two sides of the same coin, but yep, now that you mention it, totally. What I see in the center, well, the center, and this, like saying what you really mean is the healing center, but the problem center is, I think, this discomfort. It just feels really, it's so uncomfortable. I made a video about this the other day, very daringly. I thought, oh boy, here comes the hate mail. But the video was called "Should Men Pay for First Dates?"
Mm.
And I had read an article somewhere else and I commented on it, and a whole bunch of people piled on. So, my opinion, this is my opinion. My whole life, I always paid my own way. My mom told me to do that. I refused to depend on men. Curiously, every man I ended up with was not dependable. And then so I got mentored to try it the old way and just be like, let the guy do the asking, let him pay, at least for the first date. In my life, I did a lot more of the paying and self-support and supporting the kids. And, I always ended up over functioning and overburdened. So I let that be the filter of finding somebody who would ultimately meet me, in a better place. And it was so uncomfortable to do that, to let the man do it. I wanted to grab the check and I had to like drill down when I was making this video. Why? Why is that uncomfortable? I was like, well, he might reject me, you know.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
might wait for him to pay and then he's like, "Are you going to put your credit card on the little receipt there? Are you or not?" That it would be this awful moment where I got, slapped for hoping that he liked me. So I've been married now for a long time and for 11 years and we dated for 5 years. But I had to, the 2 years before I met him was my transition from like disastrous relationships to a totally durable, good relationship. Not perfect, of course,
Of
but
course.
it changed when I could get through the uncomfortable moments and I was trying to control that moment where you can get rejected and be simultaneously appealing yet tough, you know, tender and cute, but hard as nails. I don't know, it just wasn't working for me. And the people who got through and ended up in my life, I had a really strong pattern of going for people who were ultimately unavailable. And they would be unavailable in different ways. It wasn't the exact same way. And I guess we all have a theory. Maybe we do that because we're not really available. And that's my current thinking, that I think there's this very anxious moment. And I felt it too before when like making a major purchase where I need to do due diligence. I need to look into this and see if this is really in my budget, if this is really the best car for me. But I just feel so uncomfortable with that moment where people are waiting for me to make that decision that I just go, oh yeah, fine, blah, blah. And so that's currently my healing is currently there, like learning to just be, oh, I'm uncomfortable. What needs to happen here for me to feel good about this decision down the line? And so this is my hierarchy of like what healing allows me to do well. And not it couldn't be soon enough. Life is a lot of little decisions about what you're investing in, what you're letting into your life. And boy, nothing will wreck your life like letting in a bad partner,
Mhm.
and there goes the next generation now. So,
A lot of the therapy clients that I work with who, have been in relationships like that and eventually end up in, as you said, not a perfect relationship, of course, but like a
yeah,
healthy, functional relationship.
yeah,
That discomfort that you're describing, it is almost all we talk about for the first few months of that relationship. And sometimes the details are a little bit different from one person to the next, but some of the biggest common thread I think I've seen is it's really scary to have something to lose. And I think, especially when it comes to like relational trauma, when you've kind of learned that like the world or people aren't super reliable in like two or three big experiences rather than lots of little ones, feeling like you have something that you care about and something that would really hurt if you didn't have it anymore, it becomes terrifying because you're all too aware that it could change in an instant. This could all be an act. This person could just be, showing me this persona they've crafted, and who knows who they really are on the inside. And when I actually start to feel safe with them or attached to them, that's terrifying. I've also heard people say, being treated poorly by other people, especially if it's like for over a long period of time or multiple people, it can really affect how you see yourself, and it can cause you to see
Yes.
yourself in a very low manner, right?
Yeah.
So something else I see that happens to a lot of people is if somebody likes them, if you have a very low view of yourself and somebody else has like a high view of you, it's like, what's wrong with you? It's like that's a red flag that you think I'm a person worth investing time and energy into.
Hmm.
There must be something wrong with you for you to think that because you have mischaracterized me because I belong down here.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten specific about that too. And working with others, I think it's shame. It evokes shame. It sort of
Yeah.
sets off this shame pulse that just goes, "Oh, I'm not up to this." And then I find fault with the person. I'm talking about myself, and I'm talking about myself just to kind of I feel it's important to explain, like, this is all stuff that I experienced and why I teach other people how they can do it. But I see this all the time in I have a coaching program for women who are trying to stop dating unavailable people and date people with whom they can be fulfilled. And we have a number of programs for coaching, and my team runs those. But I have a course and I do a lot of content about limerence, obsessive love with somebody you can't have, but also just like the attachment of your life for years to relationships that are not good, and the where the abandonment trigger is so strong that you'll tolerate it forever, basically, to avoid the depression that comes on when you end it. The abandonment feeling is so strong. So and so these are some of the key moments, I think, when trauma can dictate what happens in your life, or you can come up with some tools and some support to move through those moments. And it's just a moment, it's a moment when you know you need to leave a relationship and you feel like you can't. That's the time. You know, that's the crucial time. And then the year or two or whatever it's going to be afterward, where you're healing from that and you're changing your standards. So I like to work with people who are in that period afterwards and they want to do something different and they haven't conceived it yet. And I teach them what I did. And it has to begin with, well, what is your ideal life like and what is your ideal relationship like? And almost without exception, when I've asked people, because between my webinars and courses and coaching and everything, when I've asked people, what do you really want in a partner? They almost never say marriage. So at first I used to go, what am I, like the unusual one here? Like I really wanted to get married. I knew that. And nothing less would do. And when it came right down to it, most people did want to get married. I know there are some who don't. They want a long-term commitment, or whatever they want. But most people, and certainly among women, they want marriage. They want it to be, a promise, a forever thing. And if they're having kids, something where that's a team effort forever, just and the financial togetherness on it. But they can't say it. Like there was something about both the culture and the trauma we've been through that made that seem like too much to ask, or almost like embarrassing to want. Like I'm not one of those girls who wants to get married. I mean, I literally used to hide that about myself, which is totally self-sabotage when you're dating. Like don't hide that. If that's not what somebody else wants, let them break up with you. You will never have what you want. And it's very, it's a conversation that needs to happen early, but I could not be clear within myself that I wanted it, that I deserved it, that basically that was the idea, that was what I wanted for my life. And I wasn't, I knew I wouldn't be happy with less. So that's when things started to change is I just owned it. That's what I wanted. And I used my techniques to just basically rinse off all this like residual shame I had. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I think it's still there too. I know it is. Young people are always telling me, you had it so much easier. And I'm like, well, then I really feel sorry for you because it was not easy for me either. But there's this stigma. And when you were really neglected as a kid, you were basically groomed, you were primed to hide what you really want and put up with this much love when any ordinary human needs this much love and this much you can count on somebody. And so I call that crap fit, like trained to fit myself to unacceptable people and situations. And I was just really good at it. And there were all sorts of magical thinking things that people fall into to justify it, to be like, well, he did have a lot of trauma. So even though he rages at me whenever he has a bad day at work, it's his trauma and I want to help him. And so that's when I sort of put question marks in people and go like, I mean, could you if you even wanted to? And, if he's not working on it, is there anything you can do? And I don't think you can really push people to see these things, but when that moment comes to just know what do I want between relationships is this golden moment where you can keep that written down. I'm like, keep it in your pocket.
Mhm.
Never go away without it. Like keep it there. Like, how do I know what are the red flags and what is it that I'm looking for that's really important so that when you meet somebody and that sparks fly, you're like, wait a second. It says here, not married to somebody else. Oh, darn. Foiled again, but no. So the answer is no. I'm not going to date this guy. You know?
With regard to relationships that overstay their welcome, too, something else I see
Yeah.
a lot that I think gets people trapped in that is sunk cost fallacy, which is more of a financial term. But
Yeah, yeah.
with anything, you don't absorb the loss of something until you exit it, right? So, like if I invested $50,000 in Sears in like 2008 or whenever it started to go down, and it's gone down by half. So I've lost air quotes $25,000. You haven't actually
Right.
lost the money until you sell, though. As
Right.
long as you're still in, you can hold on to that hope that like it could go back up, they could
It'll come back
recover.
up.
Exactly. And if you sell, that's when you officially say, I have lost $25,000. And it's the same, with a relationship. It's usually not there is finances in a relationship, but it's
Yeah.
usually the time and energy. I don't want to, the last 4 years of my life will have been for nothing if I give up
Right.
on this person now. But if you see that the quality of the interactions and the safety of the relationship is just going down, e- the longer you wait, the more painful it is. And
Yeah.
sometimes that financial metaphor helps people see like, oh, this is Sears. Like this guy is the person. It's not always a guy. It's usually a guy for whatever reason. This person's a stock that's not going to go back up. And
Yeah.
the
You
sooner
serve more
I
men,
exit, the
right?
less I lose, right?
Yeah. Your audience skews male, right?
Actually, no, they
Oh,
don't. I know.
yeah.
Yeah, it's about two-thirds female, which I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah.
I think that's less than the typical skew for like mental health content, but it still does skew female.
Yeah. Mine is even a little more female, but people relate
Sure.
to us, so
Yeah,
yeah. And my audience is a little unusual. They're a little older. They match my age often. They sort
sure.
of hover around. They're all ages, but my audience is really diverse. I love it. People are often surprised. They're like, I have a publicist, the last couple years because I have books out and they're like,
Yeah.
well, we got this offer. It's like a Black men's Christian podcast, so it's probably not right for you. And I'm like, oh, no, no, that's right for me. Yeah, that's a big
Yeah,
piece of my audience. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I'm there. They're always like, is there anybody you can't do? I'm like, I guess skeptics, but people
Yeah.
people who sincerely want to heal are so lovely.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful place for a person to be in, and you can see it. It's like a brightness in the eyes of where some hurdle has been crossed, where instead of like defending against change, there's just like, I'm ready. I would like to change. I don't even know what I'm trying to do yet, but I'm open. And
Yeah.
I love that in people. I mean, I love a lot of things about people, but that openness, I can like, I've been there and I have a little detector that I just am like, oh, there you are. There you are. It's like, it's a more wonderful place really than being all done with your healing. It's so full of possibility. It's so powerful. There's like this amazing power in it. And I love to I love to accompany people on that. So that because when you have trauma, even if you get that good feeling where you're like on the precipice, you're right there, you're ready to start making the changes. And there's almost like a metaphysical power to it that kicks in. But it's very easy then to collapse and be like, oh, it never works though, or
Yeah.
oh, here we go again, or some bad thing happens. Bad things, heads up everybody, they never stop happening.
Hmm.
But the really bad things do slow down when you start healing because you're not bringing these people into your life who are bringing constant chaos and, you know, lawsuits or whatever it is. It does get better. But in the end, we all have to face like loss and eventually loss of our own lives. So that's part of it. So for me, healing is not like everything gets perfect. It's not like an aspirin you take. It's like you brush your teeth and you just keep doing it every day a couple of times. Because my technique is twice a day, and they're like,
Yeah.
"But when am I going to be done?" It's like, I don't know. When are you going to need to stop brushing your teeth?
Right.
know?
Yeah. Well, that's probably a perfect segue to wrap up for now. Obviously, there's a lot more we could have talked about, but
Yeah, well, we could do it
maybe we'll
again.
have to do a part two sometime down the road. What
No,
do you
you gave me a
think?
gift. Thank you. Thank you for introducing me to your audience. I'm really happy to meet everybody and get a chance to tell them about this complex PTSD thing. And
No,
yeah,
we really appreciate it, and I'm sure they're going to find a lot of value in this episode.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.